Hi everyone, welcome back to another video of Mike's Geek Corner with your host, Mike Quevedo. And as we are in Halloween season, I picked up to review for you the iconic original Swamp Thing run. In this package, Swamp Thing, The Bronze Age Volume 1, published by DC in 2018, and collects the issues House of Secrets number 92, and Swamp Thing numbers 1 through 13, which ran from 1971 to 1974. All stories are written by the late Wolverine co-creator Len Wein, and the late Bernie Wrightson, making his impactful mark as a legendary artist in the industry with the one-shot story House of Secrets number 92 and Swamp Thing numbers 1 through 10, with the late Nestor Redondo taking over the art in issues 11 through 13. The cover art is by Carl Kerschel. Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson first created a Swamp Thing self-contained story in House of Secrets number 92 in 1971, which deals with a married woman living in the early 20th century named Linda, who can't get over the death of her former husband Alex, who, unbeknownst to her, her current husband Damien, who was also once a close friend of Alex, is actually the one who had him murdered due to jealousy for the love of Linda. After Damien had buried Alex in the swamp, Alex seemingly returns from the dead, transformed into a fearsome Marky Bog-like monster seeking his former love. This story received a lot of praise from readers, and they wanted more of that creature. So Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson, at the suggestion of EC artist turned DC editor Joe Orlando, reimagined the original concept for an ongoing series by setting it in contemporary times. In the first issue of Swamp Thing, titled Dark Genesis, we're introduced to botanist Alec Holland and his wife Linda, escorted by government special agent Matt Cable, as they arrive at a secret facility in the Louisiana bayous to do government-funded work on a biorestorative formula that can terminate hunger worldwide. After Alec rejects the offer of a criminal outlet called the Conclave to buy the formula from him through extortion, the Conclave then manages to implement a radio transmitter inside the Hollands compound, hidden inside the head of a dog the Hollands decided to adopt. The Conclave return to find Alec Holland alone in the facility to repeat their offer for the formula, and after Alec refuses again, he becomes incapacitated by one of the Conclave members, and before Alec regains consciousness, the Conclave places a bomb beneath the table lab, which goes off before Alec can disarm it. Becoming engulfed in the flames as his body has been drenched with the biorestorative formula, Alec hurls himself into the nearing river of the bog, seemingly disappearing from sight. After Alec's burial, Linda Holland and Matt Cable return to the rebuilt lab, where Linda is said to continue the work she and her seemingly defunct husband had started. While farther from out of the waters of the swamp arise a large, imposing, mock-encrusting man-like creature, whose inner dialogue indicates that it is Alec Holland transformed by the biorestorative formula into what would be called the Swamp Thing. After Cable is sneaked upon and knocked unconscious by a Conclave member, the latter and the other member, called Ferret, enter the compound and kill Linda. After Swamp Thing discovers Linda's body, he unleashes his fury on the two Conclave members. In the following issues, while being tracked by Matt Cable for believing the creature to be responsible for the murder of the Hollands, we see Swamp Thing venture overseas and back to the Louisiana swamps in the sort of yarns that makes the concept of the Hulk's misunderstood traveler motif, with elements of those of Universal and Hammer horror, Lovecraftian horror, noir, and Ray Bradbury-like sci-fi fantasy. In the second issue, The Man Who Wanted Forever, Swamp Thing is taken captive by misshapen beings called Unmen, and they take him by flight all the way to the Balkans by order of their creator, the mysterious aged alchemist Arcane. Once inside Arcane's castle, Swamp Thing manages to break free of the chains that bind him and attempts to escape the castle as he battles the Unmen. Arcane, however, convinces him that he intends no harm, and that he offers him the opportunity to be transformed into Alec Holland through sorcery, and in turn Arcane to inhabit the body of Swamp Thing so he can live forever. Arcane accomplishes his deed successfully, and Alec Holland is filled with joy to be himself again. But later at night, Holland discreetly discovers the terrible truth of what Arcane plans to do with his newfound power from his Swamp Thing body. Will Alex sacrifice his chance for a normal existence, trying to become once again the monstrous behemoth to impede a far greater catastrophe? In the third issue, The Patchwork Man, Matt Cable traces Swamp Thing to the Balkans and travels towards there accompanied by the Holland's Pooch, who, unbeknownst to Cable, still has the hidden radio transmitter from which the Conclave's head, Mr. E, is hearing all that transpires. When Cable arrives at his destination and begins inquiring with the townsfolk, he comes across a clinic where he meets Abigail Arcane, the niece of the Twisted Alchemist, and inquires about the airplane used to fly Swamp Thing from Louisiana to the Balkans. All the while, Swamp Thing is recovering from a very heightened fall while exiting Arcane's castle. As Swamp Thing comes to his senses, he notices the castle is on fire, and as a result, it ultimately crumbles down. Before Matt Cable had any chance to go investigate for answers, and leaving Abigail very torn, as her uncle was the only family she had. However, one of the unmen who inhabited Arcane's castle managed to escape. This creature begins to recall his past. He was once Gregory Arcane, father of Abigail, who, while making his way to see his daughter after being long gone, steps on a landmine and is seemingly killed. His brother, the wizard Arcane, however, reconstructs him as the hideous, patched-up, misshapen outcast that he is now. The patched-up creature comes across Abigail and Matt Cable, and after incapacitating Cable, the creature takes the now fainted Abigail in his arms and runs off. As the creature is crossing a bridge with Abigail still unconscious, below in the running stream, Swamp Thing is resting after having escaped the burning castle. And after recognizing the patchwork creature as one of the unmen from Arcane's castle, Swamp Thing decides not to leave the fate of the girl he is carrying to his patched-up hands. For the fourth entry, Monster on the Moors, we find that the seaplane that was carrying Abigail Arcane and Matt Cable that had left the Balkans crash lands in the Scottish moors due to a violent storm. However, thanks to Swamp Thing, who had discreetly boarded the same plane outside the top of one of the pontoons, the plane and its passengers are spared a much more brutal outcome as the Mossman uses his uncanny strength to diminish the impact of the landing. As Swamp Thing is about to shake the plane to see if the passengers had survived, two locals, Angus and Jenna, arrive in a carriage and, as Swamp Thing hides from sight, carry from the wreckage Abigail, Matt, and the pilot, Paul Rodman, as it is revealed that all three survived the landing in one piece. As the two locals place the three unconscious strangers in the wagon box, Swamp Thing becomes uncertain about the locals' intent after overhearing a questionable manner in their conversation and decides to follow the wagon. Finally, Swamp Thing concludes his chase of the wagon as it arrives at its destination, which happens to be an old secluded manor. Later that same night, after the three guests have been nurtured back to health and give an explanation to the rescuers of their crash landing, Paul Rodman decides to go back to the location of the crashed plane, so to make a report, against a warning from Angus not to, due to the dangers of wild animals lurking during the night. Once Rodman walks a good portion away from the manor, he is savagely killed by a fearsome, canny-looking monster. Abby, Matt, and their two hosts return to the manor after having gone out to see about the mutilated body of Rodman, and to the pleasant surprise of the two guests, Matt's adopted dog arrives at the establishment, having also survived the plane crash. The next morning, Cable tells Jenna McCobb that he and Abigail are ready to leave, before being introduced to Jenna's son, Ian, and very shortly after are told by Angus that the horse of their carriage has run off, and that they're going to have to stay a day or two longer until another transportation passes by. However, after escaping with their lives, thanks to Swamp Thing in a close encounter with the murderous lupine, Matt and Abby are drugged by their host, and Matt then awakens to find himself strapped to a table next to Ian McCobb, as Jenna and Angus intend to operate a blood transfusion where we'll have Ian's cursed werewolf blood passed on to Matt, while Matt's pure blood will pass to Ian, curing him from the monstrous transformation. Will Swamp Thing, who struggled earlier with the werewolf costume to sink into the quicksand, somehow be able to arrive in time to impede this devious endeavor and rescue Abby and Matt? Our mock-encrusted hero returns to America in the last of the Ravenwind Witches, as Swamp Thing, after discreetly boarding a cargo ship in Scotland, is eventually discovered for what he is by the crew during the sail, and after a physical confrontation with the alarmed sailors, the misunderstood creature jumps overboard, where the currents ultimately carry him to the shores of Maine. There, inside a cave, Swamp Thing is met and befriended by a young woman named Rebecca Ravenwind and her younger small brother, Timothy, who are both hiding from persecution of a religious zealot named Gideon and his followers from the town divinity, who believe Rebecca is a witch due to her ancestry, and peculiarities transpiring around her that have unsettled the townsfolk. After Rebecca and her brother find it safe to leave the cave, Swamp Thing, feeling in debt with her for having tended to him, decides to tag along with them both, before Gideon and the driven mob confront them, and after Swamp Thing has an arm cut off with a scythe, he is forced by fire up a high cliff that ultimately crumbles beneath him and falls once again into the sea. Rebecca and Timothy are apprehended by the mob and taken back to Divinity, where, after an entitled trial, Rebecca is to be burned alive at the stake, leaving the potentially ill-fated Swamp Thing her only hope of survival. In issue number 6, A Clockwork Horror, after unsuspiciously riding along in the back of a vegetable truck traveling through the outskirts mountains of Vermont, Swamp Thing is thrown off the vehicle after the truck jounces over an unrepaired pothole and falls down the precipice roadway, where, after regaining some consciousness from the fall, is standed by a couple who happen to have the first and last name and exact look of none other than Alec and Linda Holland, who then offer the baffled Mossman to take him into their small secluded Swiss village of Birchestown and meet the town mayor, Hans Klockman, who is also a carpenter, watchmaker, and also created the town with his own hands. Once at Birchestown, Klockman invites Swamp Thing to a gathering at the town square, and the hulking bog creature is amazed at the high level of happiness that townspeople display, and also at how familiar many faces from the crowd seem to him. Clockman reveals to Swamp Thing that all of the inhabitants of Burgess are his robotic creations, based on the looks of the defunct residents of the mining town, including the Hollands, to provide them with a second chance and create a harmonious society free from mankind's baser aspects. As Swamp Thing is experiencing conflicted feelings over the genuinely designed mechanical replica of his deceased wife, things are about to get more complicated as Matt Cable, who is still eager to hunt down Swamp Thing, is sent on an assignment to investigate the resurgence of the mining town, accompanied by Abigail and their dog, who remains bugged with a transmitter from the Conclave, whose leader, Mr. E, after listening to Clockman's explanation of Burgess' robotic resonance to Cable, decides he wants to use Clockman's talents for the Conclave's benefit, and so he sends a task force backed by a mechanical behemoth to take the mayor of Burgesstown by force if they have to. Swamp Thing, guided by a clue during his encounter with the Conclave in Burgesstown, takes a ride to Gotham City in the 7th issue, Night of the Bat, along with the Mutt, with the intent in finding and risking Matt and Abigail after being taken captive by the Conclave in the former mining town to be interrogated through torture to find more about Cable's organization. As Swamp Thing makes his way through Gotham by evading the police, millionaire philanthropist Bruce Wayne, after concluding a charity board meeting, dons the cape and cowl identity of Batman, and sets out to seek hints to the identity of the Conclave leader, Mr. E, who, unbeknownst to Batman, is actually Bruce Wayne's associate Nathan Ellery. Batman's investigation into the Conclave, however, is postponed, as Commissioner Gordon informs him of a swamp monster loose in Gotham, and asks the Cape Crusader to track down the man-monster before the city enters into a white panic. Meanwhile, Swamp Thing, in trenchcoat and fedora disguise, is snooping around a bar in the Lower East Side of the city for clues to the whereabouts of Matt and Abigail. And after overhearing a group of hoodlums discussing a rendezvous in which one of them is going to meet someone from the Conclave for a job, the Marshborn giant heads to the mentioned location right after putting the rogues out of commission. But will the nocturnal masked manhunter's pursuit of Swamp Thing prove to be a disadvantage in the timely rescue of Matt and Abigail and downfall of the Conclave, as a possible coalition between Swamp Thing's strong desire for revenge against the Conclave and the Batman's uncompromising sense of duty as Gotham's protector might result in the ill fate of one of them? In The Lurker in Tunnel 13, after leaving Gotham in the back of a trailer truck, Swamp Thing disembarks the vehicle after it makes a stop at a diner in the middle of the snowy Appalachian woods, where he eventually reaches a cave where an old man is being attacked by a grizzly bear. Swamp Thing tangles with the massive ferocious beast, and ultimately the wandering moss man kills the bear and tends to the ailing old man, whose name is Ezekiel, and tells Swamp Thing he had been trying to leave his hometown of Perdition, and, as a repayment for helping him, warns Swamp Thing to not go to Perdition. For though the town was once a good mining town a long time ago, after the coal ran out and the people began to move out, Ezekiel's father turned to the knowledge of the occult and the supernatural with the intent of restoring coal and ores to the mines. But after he went to the mines with his books of forbidden knowledge, his father never returned to the town, and since then anybody who approached the mines would disappear and not be seen again, and people did not leave town as a result. Nevertheless, after the old man dies, Swamp Thing, feeling Ezekiel deserves a proper burial, and that his possible family should be notified of his passing, carries the dead body through the heavy snow into the town of Perdition. Although initially greeted with hostility by the townsfolk as they assume him the killer of Ezekiel, the dead old man's son, Jason, enters the scene, and after examining his father's fatal wound and concluding the killer to have been a bear, Swamp Thing gets an apology from the town's mayor and gives the muck-encrusted stranger hospitality, as he is tended to his wounds by Jason's wife Lydia and his son Jody. Still, despite feeling at ease at the people's kindness at first, Swamp Thing becomes suspicious of the townsfolk's overjoyed comportment with him, as he senses that there is something discomforting looming behind their merry exterior. Things do take a sharp turn in the ambience after a scream coming from the mine is heard from everyone in Perdition, much like it was with Ezekiel's father after he went into the mines with his books, and then Lydia realizes that their son Jody is missing. Swamp Thing joins the town's search party, and as they follow Jody's tracks to the mine, Jason seems determined to go inside Tunnel 13, in spite of the other townspeople's refusal to do so. But the vegetative green giant decides to go in by himself and retrieve the boy, although all behind him, the search party are all emoting a bizarre expression of glee. What is this horrifying hypothesis that resides inside this tunnel, and will Swamp Thing be the next not to return from the mines of Perdition? Swamp Thing finally returns home to the Louisiana swamps in the 9th issue called The Stalker from Beyond, after brutally exiting a night flight from Pittsburgh and walking a good number of miles. Meanwhile, Matt Cable's vacation in Florida with Abby Arcane is interrupted by the home office in Washington, as he is needed for a government assignment called Operation Space Face, in which he is to work alongside a military task force headed by Captain Brad Sampson in traveling to the Louisiana swamplands and investigate the landing of a UFO. As Swamp Thing reaches the now boarded up barn that was his lab when he was Alec Holland, in order to find some chance for a cure with his old equipment, he uses his immense strength to tear open the lock from the doors, and finds an unusual looking spacecraft in which components from Alec's machines are being used for its repair. Then he also finds a massive inhuman looking creature in a spacesuit in the lab, and Swamp Thing, filled with fury against the alien for dismantling the machinery that might have given him back a normal life, attempts to attack the unearthly visitor. But the alien uses his greater size to his advantage as he strikes a powerful kick that knocks down the Swampster down, and in the false process, causing the Starship support post to shatter and fall over Swamp Thing, seemingly killing him. Feeling regretful, the alien creature carries the body of the Moss Man to the waters of the swampland, so to lay him to rest in peace in his environment. When the alien returns to the barn to continue fixing his ship, the government task force arrives shortly after, and as the group prepares to take the off-worlder alive back to Washington, as it was ordered, one of the team members advances towards the alien to apprehend him, without yet an order to do so, before the alarmed alien strikes a blow that leaves the insubordinate trooper unconscious. Feeling sorry for his action, the alien surrenders himself to the task force, and is then shackled by sizable sophisticated manacles. As the team readies to radio to the base to send in a shopper, they realize the radio isn't working, for unbeknownst to them, Brad Sampson secretly snatched the master transmitter tube from the radio, for his obtuse paranoid mind has a different deadly plan regarding the fate of the captured visitor. And if Swamp Thing did survive the aftermath of his encounter with the creature, will he be a possible hope for the visitor, or will his anger at him linger? The last collaboration between Wein and Wrightson, issue number 10, The Man Who Would Not Die, presents us with an opening of Swamp Thing preventing the death of an old black woman named Audie the Lubian from a mortally wounded escaped convicted murderer, whose death from bullets arrived shortly after the muck-encrusted creature made its presence before the old woman and the now dead convict who was choking her right outside her shack in the middle of the bayou. Audie then tells Swamp Thing a tale going back to the days of slavery involving a cotton plantation that was owned by a man named Samson Parmenter, who was vicious and sadistic with his slaves. But when his abusive ways reached a slave woman named Elspeth, her lover, a one-armed strong slave named Jubal, stood up to Parmenter's cruelty, and as a result, Parmenter had Jubal burned alive at the stake. But not before Jubal swore an oath that not even death would stop him from dealing with Parmenter, as well as his breed, for his sins. And sure enough, not long after, Parmenter was found with his limbs torn inside his house. As Audie finishes her story, she senses that sinister eyes are watching them there and now, and after Swamp Thing spots gleaming eyes from the darkness, he chases the figures, and after a lengthy pursuit that concludes at the graveyard, the figures are finally revealed to be none other than the misshapen Unmen, whose master, the twisted alchemist Arcane, now inhabits a monstrous synthetic deformed body, which was created with the help of his Unmen through his telepathic orders after his former body was shattered during the climax of the second issue. Arcane explains to the bewildered and subdued Swamp Thing how, after the wizard's bodily change, he and the Unmen had chased him all the way to Europe and back by telepathy for the purpose of once again attaining the powerful body of the Moss Man. Swamp Thing performs a formidable display of competence after he breaks free from the Unmen's hold on him, but after a brutal confrontation with the even more massive body of Arcane, Swamp Thing is ultimately rendered partly unconscious from a heavy blow from his enemy, and is about to be ready to be carried to the Necromancer's secret lab. All the while, from the graves in the cemetery they are standing, a chilling and disturbing presence is being felt by Arcane and his mutants. Could this be related to the tale by Antediluvian? And will it benefit Swamp Thing, or spell yet another form of doom for him? Nestor Redondo takes the artistic reins from Ryson in the remaining 3 issues of this volume, beginning with Conqueror Worms, where we witnessed Matt Cable and Abby Arcane, shortly after being rescued by Swamp Thing from a terrifying mutated alligator, being abducted by 2 giant worms, with the muck-encrusted powerhouse temporarily put out of commission by one of the worms with a beam before he could prevent the abduction. Both Matt and Abby awaken to find themselves captive, along with 4 other abductees, inside the swamp-sunken city of New Eden, which is under the control of Professor Zachary Nail, who also controls the mutant worms. Nail explains to his captives how he created New Eden in the middle of the swamp as a refuge from man's destructive pollution, and, as it occurred previously in Phantom Stranger number 14, collected efficient strong people so to be conditioned to do Nail's bidding and help him create a new society, until occult investigator Dr. Terrence 13 interfered, and the swamp's plant life crushed the dome city, making it sink further down the swamp, with him inside near dead until the mutant worms, who were survivors of an ancient race, helped him recover, and now he plans to continue the same goal. Meanwhile, after Swamp Thing recovers from the attack by one of the worms, he spots the trail of the monsters and follows it. While back at the sunken city, Cable and the others execute an escape plan in their locked quarters, and after managing to kill a worm, they make their way to Nail's chamber, and as two of the captives kill another worm, Matt takes hold of the draconian madman using his deadly instrument, and tells Nail to order his slimy creatures to surrender. But the other three worms reject Nail's pleading to do as Cable says, as the creatures reveal their true reason for aiding Nail in his capturing of people. They use Nail because they want people as their food. Will the 6 escapees manage to make their way to freedom by surviving the terrifying Conqueror worms if Swamp Thing doesn't reach New Eden soon? Swamp Thing travels back through time in the Eternity Man, after he comes across a gemstone with a 7-pointed star carved in it and touches it, then finds himself in a different looking location with a planar landscape, volcanic mountains, and a ravenous T-Rex approaching the mystified man monster, who after achieving an effective feat of self-defense against a titanic primal beast, is overtaken by the T-Rex's powerful tail. But before the prehistoric behemoth can lay his razor-sharp teeth onto Swamp Thing, a fur-clad, primitive-looking warrior comes to the rescue as he hurls himself atop of the Saurian and slashes the creature's jugular with a stone axe. As Swamp Thing helps its rescuer in tackling the Tyrannosaurus Rex by breaking its leg, the beast finally falls, but as it does, its dead carcass lands on the heroic barbarian, impaling him from the other side of the same weapon he had penetrated the T-Rex's jugular. Swamp Thing sees the image of the 7-pointed star of the gem in the primitive man's eyes, and the bog-red giant realizes the gem is responsible for his presence in this place and time. The gem begins to flare, blinding Swamp Thing with its brilliance, while the barbarian, who had been presumed dead, picks up the gem and runs off from sight. Swamp Thing then finds himself in ancient Rome inside the Roman Colosseum, where he witnesses the same man who had previously been a prehistoric barbarian, now battling as a blindfolded gladiator, and after getting killed by his gladiatorial opponent, the gem repeats its glaring as it had done before, now sending Swamp Thing to Europe in the mid-14th century during the time of the Black Death, where from outside the window of a cottage, Swamp Thing recognizes the same man from the previous 2 eras, and he is holding the gem. Who is this man, and what is his connection to the 7-pointed gem, and his existence in all these past centuries, and will Swamp Thing return to the present? We reach the final installment of this volume with the story The Leviathan Conspiracy. As Swamp Thing is wrestling the same kind of mutated swamp creatures as the alligator from issue 11, which he theorizes are the result of a chemical imbalance within the swamp that turned him into what he is, Matt, Cable, and fellow former New Eden captive, Bolt, captures Swamp Thing with the use of specially designed foam guns and take him to a lab in the Fenwick Military Academy, where he is kept in a hydroponic tank, with a duplication of his natural environment, for the purpose of investigating his origins. After he attempts an escape by breaking the glass from the tank, with Professor Coolidge DeGrasse losing his life after stepping in front of a gunfire intended for Swamp Thing, the Mossman is once again restrained by the foam guns used by the guards, and put back in the resort chamber, now surrounded by pointed laser beams around it. Feeling somewhat responsible for the death of DeGrasse, Cable decides to make up for that by getting himself inside the tank and try to talk to Swamp Thing alone, feeling unthreatened from him after the creature had saved his life more than once. Once inside the chamber with the hulking man-plant, Cable, after much persistence, finally convinces Swamp Thing to reveal the secret of who he was. With this revelation, what will Cable do? Will he risk his life and career to save his former friend? So as you can see, these stories are quite a treat. With Len Wein already experienced with the combo of supernatural horror and superheroics in the Phantom Stranger titles, and Bernie Wrightson, like Wein, coming off from such easy-style horror comics as House of Secrets, and also Marvel's Chamber of Darkness, their collaboration as Swamp Thing is one of the most defining achievements in the Bronze Age era of comics, for it pushed the envelope in the medium as far as telling Gothic stories like those of Universal Monster movies and H.P. Lovecraft, as well as the speculative science fiction of Ray Bradbury and Rod Serling, with an unconventional superhero who is this tragic, wandering monster. Bernie Wrightson, as I've mentioned in other videos, is one of my all-time favorite comic artists. I've already reviewed his later work in Batman the Cult and Punisher POV, and I will put the link below for those 2 videos in case you're interested in more of Wrightson. And I think the work he did in those is dynamite, as well as his work in the Creepshow comic adaptation, his Captain Stern short story for Heavy Metal, which got an animated adaptation as a segment in the Heavy Metal movie, and his art for the Hulk Thing graphic novel as well. But without a doubt, Swamp Thing remains his Citizen Kane, in my opinion. His style is one that suggests the compelling ink work and anatomy of Frank Frazetta, the exaggerated facial structure of Jack Davis, and the eeriness of Graham Ingalls. What John Carpenter has been to movies, Bernie Wrightson was to comics. His work has an atmosphere that is unsettling, and as the story advances, things gradually get more intense. Nestor Redondo's art is also one that provides a sharp sense of the weird and the macabre, albeit in a style that leans more in the classic style of 1930s comic strip artists like Alex Raymond and Hal Foster. His rendition of Swamp Thing is definitely the more melancholic looking. He does overall a very good job in living up to the challenge of taking over Ryson. Before wrapping this up, I want to give an honorable mention to both the 1982 film adaptation of Swamp Thing and the 2019 live-action streaming show from DC Universe, for each capturing the spirit of this classic initial comics run. Wes Craven, working from a bit of a shoestring budget under arduous conditions, delivered a pretty admirable effort in echoing the mood that Wein and Ryson established. If you can get over the at times faulty Swamp Thing suit, you should be okay. But as live-action versions of Swamp Thing go, DC Universe's streaming show, produced by Aquaman and Saw Helmer, James Wan, proved to be the long-awaited justice that this DC property deserved, and gloriously captured the Wein and Ryson run, as well as the Alan Moore Steve Bissett saga from the 80s. And here's hoping for a second season from HBO Max. So, Swamp Thing, The Bronze Age, Volume 1, it's vintage, sequential storytelling from the 70s, much like Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams' Batman run, or the Mark Wolfman, Gene Colan, Tomb of Dracula run. Go find it at online stores. There's also the trade paperback Swamp Thing Dark Genesis, which should be cheaper, and it only features the Wein and Ryson comics run. So that's it for this review. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like. Please make sure you subscribe. Feel free to leave your comments below, and I'll be seeing you soon. Happy Halloween. Bye.